The following podcast episode is an interview with Anneke Lucas about her experience as a child sex slave in a high-level elite pedophile ring. Some of the content of this episode can be intense and disturbing for some people to listen to. Hence, I want to give a trigger warning. However, what I found most inspiring about Anneke's story is her healing journey over the years, her strength of spirit, and her courage to speak out about this very important topic publicly. I have a lot of respect for Anneke. She's an incredibly inspiring, authentic human being who has helped shine light into the darkest corner of humanity with the message of hope and that we can overcome anything. Before we start, I also want to let everyone know that enrollment and applications are now open for our next round of our private group coaching program, Embodied Soul Awakening. It is a 14-week in-depth program of psycho-spiritual work based on the fourfold approach of holistic self-work, combining deep inner work in context of the outer work in light of the evolution of consciousness and the immense changes humanity are going through. The program starts on December 26, 2022 until April 3rd, 2023. If you want to learn more about it and apply, go to thattimeoftransition.com. All right, I welcome everyone to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Today we are host Bernhard Ganther, and I have a very, very special guest, and even I would say an old friend coming on this podcast, and it's Anneke Lucas, and she just released her book, Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave. So this is a heavy topic we're going to dive into, and many people may be already aware of my audience who, I've talked about before your case. And before we dive into it, I really wanted to share that, we have been connected already since the early 2012, 13, we first connected. And I want to just give the audience quick the backstory, because I remember when I did a lot of research in my work as well, looking into the dark side, pedophilia, elite pedophile networks, and all of that satanic ritualistic abuse, which is not an easy topic to research at all, right? It is not for the faint-hearted. But I remember in 2011, I came across a German documentary with English subtitles about a sexual ritual abuse in France, a pedophile ring. And that also included interviews with 3 different of the child victims. And it was very disturbing, very revealing. But I'm also like, we need to make the darkness conscious. We need to be able to talk about it, to show what's really going on. And I remember around that time when I posted, you actually commented on the post, and then we started messaging, and we started actually talking on the phone before you came out more publicly about your story. And we had a great connection. And I remember sharing some of the details, very horrifying, of your own experience. But then in 2014, you wrote an article, I forgot the title, but it was on the Elephant Journal article, where you kind of came out with your own experience, and that kind of like opened the floodgates. And I remember also in our communications, 2012-13, that you were saying that we were in the process of writing a book, and I think this is it right now. And I also want to mention real quick, because you said like you already wrote most of it around 2004, right? It's in your introduction, but even the publisher back then, this is too heavy. We're not ready for this. But with the times we're in right now, and that's like I like to say, even the silver lining, with the craziness, what's going in the world. Like there's so much craziness. We know that right now, and darkness, but it's coming up to the light. And, it's almost an opportunity I see to bring us up your experience, what you have shared, and what's really going on in the world. So, really want to talk about the content of the book, what you've been through and all of that, but also most importantly, your healing journey. So with this longer introduction, Anneke, I'm really happy. I'm really grateful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, yes, it's my pleasure. Yes, and thanks for having me. Absolutely.
Excellent. Beautiful. So I want to also give fair warning in a sense, what you even wrote in the book, the important notice, there's a general trigger warning for intense material such as extreme child neglect, sadism, sex trafficking, and graphic description of sexual, physical abuse, violence, and murder. So I want to give a fair warning because it can, for certain people, evoke a trigger, but I think it is important to bring this story to light. So, basically the way you frame this as like from your own experience, it's like really coming face to face with what you call the world's greatest curse, which is the abuse of power. And you know how powerful people have been abused. And it starts probably, the abuse of power starts right away with your mother, who basically kind of, you know, gave you over to this elite pedophile ring. So maybe let's give the audience, you know, who are not familiar, in kind of overview of your experiences of this elite pedophile ring in Belgium, how it started, and also eventually how you escaped or got released.
Oh, thank you. I'll try. So yes, I was born in Belgium in 1963, and my mother was single. And we were in Brussels. So the first 3 years, she did start to abuse me immediately after birth. And but she also had a job, and so gave me to a caretaker every day who was very loving. So I had this dichotomy, the mother who was abusive, extremely dangerous, and then the caretaker who was actually very loving and very caring. So I had both the sense of what it's like to be human, being adored, being loved, being cared for particularly, and being able to be myself, if you will. And then there was this mother who was constantly projecting, where I had to be something else, and that was either powerfully evil or some bland extension of my mother's greatest fears. So I lived with that split from the beginning. And my mother married when I was 3. So I lost the caretaker. We moved to the Flemish part of the country. And it was a few years later that she started to, she didn't, it sort of happened accidentally more than anything. I would say that it did happen. There was a woman that infiltrated in our family who was a recruiter for the network. And she and her husband ended up being the ones to take me to the first orgy. So they were working for the network pretty much in the typical way that this used to happen, people infiltrating in families and then sort of end up taking the children. And they spent a year of grooming before they took me. So took me to all sorts of outings, so from age 5 to 6. All sorts of outings that I never liked them. I never wanted to go, but it was convenient for my mother, who had a young child, who had my brother. So after a year, I was taken to the first orgy by those people. And then somehow my mother took over from them. When I tried to tell my mother what had happened, she tried to take over. So those years, 5.5 years to be exact, I say 5 years, 6 years, in the network from age 6 to 11, I was subjected. So it was in the Belgian network. So first I was considered a throwaway child, if you will. That's to say that my mother had given me up, so anybody could do anything, and that included killing if they wanted. So that didn't quite happen, and I was, though, in situations where that was made very clear that it could happen. And at age 9, then I was traded up to somebody from the international network. That the Belgian politician who was the head of the Belgian pedophile network was Paul van den Boeinants. He was then Minister of National Defense. He was also Prime Minister of Belgium twice. So he was the big boss, let's say, the mafia boss of the network. He gave me to an international networker, someone who was a very famous international billionaire. And I, by miracle, I would say, that man took an interest in me and then had me mind control trained in order for me to become his personal sex slave, spy. Was creating a platform for me to be a famous French actress, singer. From age 9 to 10, I was being trained for those things all the time. And then I went against him after a year. so again, this training was both. I was both getting attention that I'd always needed, and I was being considered special, and so there
So
was a lot that.
part of you trusted these people, right? Because of the lack of love you experienced in your childhood.
Right,
And this
right.
person you're referring to, is it by any chance this protagonist you named Patrick? Is that the
No,
guy? That was
no,
somebody else.
this was someone else. This was someone I refer to as the big shot. That
Hmm.
was just an international, like famous name kind of thing,
Hmm.
who was internationally known. And that the boss of the network wanted to give me to that person around, and this was surrounding the Bilderberg meeting in Belgium in 1972
Wow.
that happened.
Hmm.
So the Belgian networkers did a, a ritual,
Hmm.
satanic ritual in honor of this person. And
Hmm.
so one child was killed at this ritual, and I was raped.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
So, like in light of this is really intense information, like just sharing that, and I read in your book, I mean, even just understanding basic trauma, obviously, when you were younger and then quote unquote escaped, you also had to obviously disassociate, blocked out all these memories that were gone, right? I mean, that's anybody who understands trauma, this too. It's actually a necessary survival defense mechanism to disassociate. There's nothing wrong with it. We need it. That kind of helped you survive, right?
I did that anyway, absolutely. I went to school during the week quite often, and then eventually the mind control training uses that specifically
Oh, okay. Hmm.
to make
So that.
sure that you will not remember, and puts in programs, in fact, that if you start to remember, that's called suicide programming, that if you start to remember that you either think you're
Mm,
crazy and will be treated as crazy, or you think you have to kill yourself, and
yeah.
that is so very common. So it's used, the
Hmm.
awareness of trauma and the awareness of the psychological awareness of the people who were involved in this mind control training is extreme.
That makes sense. I mean, this is the MK Ultra type of programming. They use it obviously to protect themselves. That makes
Yes.
sense. And then you could go home to your mom and like, oh, live your regular life, and then
Yeah.
and then even not realizing what's going on with her, kind of like
Right.
the absolute denial basically until she she does it again. So yes,
Absolutely.
continue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I was in that, like, say, I call it the seat of power. Let's say those people who are behind the scenes, the most powerful people in the world, who were controlling everything, the culture, completely,
Yeah.
and very happy to have that control, let's say. And then someone who was then making me into his personal slave. So let's just say that it was for supposedly a great honor,
Mm.
but it was also very dark. So eventually I turned against my owner, and then I got completely rejected, instantly and violently rejected, reprogrammed,
Hmm.
and to sort of thrown back into the network, into the Belgian, the smaller, let's say the smaller branch of the network, back to Belgium, and which is where my book really starts, is when I met this young gangster who then 1 year later, after, again grooming me and then abusing
Hmm.
me very badly, got me out of the network.
Hmm. That's the character Patrick I just mentioned, correct?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, in your book. All
Yes.
right. Interesting. So I also want to mention, because I remember that you mentioned this even when we talked about years ago, but you mentioned in your book as well this famous case of Marc Dutroux. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Like that kind of like came up in 1996 about like Belgian pedophile rings, but he seems to be a smaller fish, but kind of linked into all these elite pedophile rings. And that's came, I think, maybe the first disillusionment or the coming face to face with the reality of the situation, because um, this case eventually got dismissed, right? Because all these high-ranking people, like was almost deliberately derailed by the Belgian justice, right? So, what is your uh, basic experience or relationship to like this case, and not being able to bring it out to justice because everybody's kind of like in it, so to speak?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's the Dutroux in French, Dutroux.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name of the pimp for the network who got caught when basically 4 bodies of girls were found in
Mm-hmm.
Belgium. And he had sort of started to operate a little bit differently from the other pimps who used to infiltrate into families, as was done with me. He had gone and kidnapped children, but then he had no place to keep them
Mm-hmm.
except his own homes. And so he had literally constructed dungeons in his homes to keep those
Wow.
children. And then some children died in there when he was, doing a little stint in jail, actually. So two of the girls died during that time of starvation. So Marc Dutroux was caught in 1996, and it was a big thing in Belgium and all of Europe, really. It was also here in US. It was just written about, at least in the New York Times and so forth. Huge scandal. Everyone was speaking about the network because Marc Dutroux himself said he had people in high places that would protect him as soon as he was caught. And then he changed his tune pretty soon after. And then one of the defendants in the Dutroux case was Michel Nihoul. So there were 4 defendants. It was Marc Dutroux, his wife, Michel Martin, a young heroin addict called Michel Lelièvre, and then finally Michel Nihoul. And Michel Nihoul was higher up in the network than Marc Dutroux. And Michel Nihoul was active when I was being trafficked in the network. And he is the person who I name in my book. And he also, was always, from the moment I started seeing him, which was like 72, 73, he was always the middle person. He was a real brown nose. He really loved Paul van den Boenans, who was the minister, who was basically the head of the network. He was a small-time businessman and then used his connections from the network to whatever scams that he was doing. But he was always called a Brussels businessman. He was very active in many capacities in the network, and he was caught, and then he basically was let off on the most important charge, that was complicity in the kidnappings of these victims.
Hmm. So he basically, what happened basically, what I remember, that one of the witnesses, they didn't believe her, basically, or was just thrown under the rug. So basically, that's kind of how these obviously every just judge is bought for, basically, to dismiss cases like that. That's why it's so hard to expose it, I would say, right? That's
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, that case was a big one, because there suddenly the whole world was speaking about the
mm,
elite pedophile network in Belgium. So it was more open than any other network ever was. And I think it did a lot to the country of Belgium, in the sense that to suppress that again took a lot of work.
mm-hmm,
Yes, the victims' testimonies was all cut off from the case
mm,
before, but then they went public. So then it was a big, job to suppress their believability in the press. That was done very effectively, with mocking and of course ridiculing and also calling them crazy. And then it took 8 years for the case to go to trial, and by that time 30 people died who had any kind of physical evidence
well,
regarding the existence of the greater network. So by the time Marc Dutroux was tried, it was a one-person case, or it was like him and
mm-hmm,
his companions that were tried. Only Michel Nihoul was really the link to the greater network, and then he was let off by the judge, even though a majority of the jury found him guilty
mm.
for complicity in the kidnapping, which was the most serious charge he had. And then that majority wasn't great enough, so the judge had to make a decision, and he decided that he was not guilty.
Wow, yeah, that's how it works, how they protect themselves. So, I want to talk a little bit about more your experience, then we go later, definitely, because what I find personally most inspiring in your story is your healing journey. And, because that's really what it's all about. Because, in the face of evil, we can easily fall, even like, yeah, there's a victim, but if you get stuck in the victim place, you can never truly heal, right? That's kind of almost a paradox in a sense, right? And then really like going on this journey, and it's a spiritual journey as well, which is really inspiring. But with your case, I mean, like you just mentioned, Bilderberg Group. I mean, this high-end, high elite pedophile ring with people in positions of high power. Obviously, you've come across people who are very, very well known in the public, right? And it's obviously very controversial, as you write, because it involves public people and politicians, positions of high power. And I remember in our private conversation, you mentioned some names here and there. So how did you go about in your own, talking about it, what to choose, like who to name, who not to name, and pseudonym? It can be very tricky. Like, is also within you the need, like, I need to expose this person, but then if you would do it, nobody would believe you anyway, and all this internal struggle.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the reason I want to name people is actually not to expose them so much as the reason that I want to talk altogether, which is like, why shouldn't I be able to tell my story?
Mm-hmm.
And those people are supporting characters in my story.
Right.
I want to be able to name who they are just because they were there.
Yes.
And I recognize them and I have no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that is the whole, it is, of course, very tricky. In 2016, so that article was 2014, and 2013 was the first time I had an interview where I just basically answered the question that was about my work in the prisons. But I was asked a question, I answered it, and then the article was titled, former child sex slave, brings yoga to prisons. That was like the coming out. Really, it was just that I had reached a point where I said, okay, now I'm ready. I just answered the question, and it was out there on a small scale. In 2016, though, a short black and white video that I had agreed to do, where I speak about the Belgian network, went viral.
Yeah, I remember that.
Immediately, very strange things started to happen.
Mm-hmm.
People showing up my doorstep. Weird things electronically. Weird things were happening as well. And, those are all tactics that it's just everything has sort of helped me to become stronger, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2020, I was approached by a lawyer, someone who's actually in my spiritual group, but, a meditation group, someone who really meant well, someone in California who wanted to help me file a lawsuit against this big shot, the international big shot, who, so I would be filing a lawsuit against that estate of a very big name family for all the counts of sexual abuse that had happened. So sexual abuse and more. So because there had been abuse here in New York, it was going to be filed here in New York. And we needed a New York lawyer, but we then sent a draft of the complaint to the lawyers, or directly to the heir, let's say. And as soon as that happened, many things started to happen. So because then, of course, if that lawsuit would be filed, that name would be public.
Right.
And the reason I went along with this, it wasn't my idea, but the reason I thought it would be a good thing to do was because I thought it would be a safe way to name this person.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't looking forward to being involved in a lawsuit at all, and getting that kind of attention, that kind of sense. Already there's enough sensation around my story that is unpleasant, very unpleasant for me, and it's easy to do, and it's not respectful. Well, that's to say there's going to be so much more sensation, and there's going to be such a big machine put in motion to discredit me then. So what happened during that year, really, that was supposedly the preparation to this lawsuit, was quite amazing. The infiltration that happened, the people that I would meet. And then, of course, I've been mind control trained as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say, if I, would be on I always like to think from the perpetrator's perspective of what they would do. And so I would get people in my life suddenly show up in my life. They know your weak spots. They find your weak spots. And mine was that I was very inclined to support survivors no matter what. And so they sent someone to me was in my survivor group, my SRA survivor group, who became active, who, connected with me and sort of manipulated me into being there for her, but also talking a lot about her experiences with that perpetrator and that family and so forth, and then sort of concocted a story that she was back involved with that family as a sort of a double agent. And supposedly she wanted to help the case and bring some real evidence forward. And so she wanted to fish to see how much evidence we had.
Wow.
And also how many other survivors there were, because I wasn't the only survivor coming forward.
So I'm interested. So this woman, this supposed to be SRA, also a satanic ritual abuse victim, because that's how they, they want to got infiltrated. Was she also an MK Ultra victim that's running her program with you, or did she do this consciously?
Well, she was running her program with me, so she was doing the things that I was trained to do.
Okay, there you go. So you then eventually saw that because of your own.
I felt it. Yeah, I felt it from the beginning. So I was cautious, but not that cautious, because emotionally she kind of had me on my weak spot, which was that I'm going to support survivors. So it took a while for me to untangle, but I did learn a lot from that experience, from being infiltrated by someone who was trained like myself. And something I can say of it is that we are grounded in reality, right? We are grounded in the relative reality of the physical. So that is very important. And when we have any kind of feelings and attachments, they should be grounded in physical reality. So when someone shows up who's mind control trained, or the same as if an actor is acting a part, the emotions are all there, but it's not grounded in reality. And that is the difference. It seems very real in the moment. So any kind of psychopath or any kind of narcissist, really, who goes to work and seduces someone, for example, they will be emotionally very credible because they believe it in the moment, except it's not rooted in reality. And the reality is, of course, everything else that's going on.
Yeah. And they can also, really high IQ, very efficient narcissists or psychopaths with a strong mask of Seneca, and masters of emulating that as well, right?
And it's not so much emulation. I wouldn't call it that. But it's rather, for the mind control at least, that, and actors also, that they use trauma in order to get you to the fight, flight, freeze state, where you act out of survival. So your special gifts are released from that state, because that's not a normal state. You will be hearing things at long distance, or you will be seeing things from long distance, that everything, your psychic ability is much greater because you're in a pure survival state. So it's really, the brain activity will reduce to the amygdala and the brainstem.
Yeah.
And then from there out, from the amygdala, there is a decision made. It's beyond you. You don't have any conscious awareness of what happens, but you fly into action. And so the mind control training is to use the subconscious to go straight into action. So you bypass the rational mind altogether. So when you're connecting with someone, it feels real even for the actor.
Okay.
It feels real for the agent. It feels real for the mind control slave.
Yeah. That's high level MK Ultra program. I mean, that's also what you mentioned in your story. I remember, like, even the book, even you spent apparently some years in Germany or other like networks to gonna be trained. I mean, they're highly professionals. Obviously, they know psychology and trauma, in and out. They just use it or abuse it for their own sick desires and their own networks.
Absolutely. And they also make sure that we, the public, know nothing about trauma.
Yeah.
There's this dumbing down of what trauma really is, and the healing, and psychologists and everybody has to follow their model, the dumbed down model, where we are not allowed to recognize trauma in someone, and where, you have a movie and we have like a male protagonist, and he behaves really, really badly, and everybody sort of supports this bad behavior until finally there's a breaking point, and then there's this one little trauma in his background, and we're all like, oh yeah, one little trauma. And that's what the whole movie, like comes out of, is like, we go back to, it becomes reduced when, of course, when you're in mind control, you're living through this tremendous trauma all the time. And then what the public gets is this, everything is clinical. When you're depressed, it's clinical. When you have a disease, it's hereditary. Everything gets, the whole trauma conversation is muted. We bring in false memory syndrome in the 90s, and that's just right now reaching its end.
I'm sure, like, I mean, we want to go later on, but I'm sure you might have being accused of that as well, right? False memory, making things up, and all these kind of things.
Oh yeah, all of it.
Yeah,
all of that.
So that's Anneke, that's very fascinating. That you made it. I have all these aha moments because looking at the bigger picture, how this whole, we are also living over the past few years, not to get into that, but on a like global MK Ultra program, so to speak, collective mass psychosis. But you're right, because I was talking to my wife, Laura, the other day. The biggest issue, we live in this intense, how I call the matrix. It's based on this hardcore materialistic view of reality in brains. Mental illness is just a chemical imbalance in the brain, all of that. Take this pill, take that pill, and all of that, while people, the pharmaceuticals are cashing in, and it just suppresses, it numbs you even more down. It makes you even more subjective to the programming, ironically, because it changes, your whole brain structure to begin with. It's kind of like you're giving them what they want, right? And then you have the media and all of that. Like you mentioned, it's like constantly a subliminal.
Like everything that comes from the outside is flawed. Everything is part of the brainwashing, including the truther. A lot of what we get from the truthers is also.
Thank you so much for saying that, Anna, because I've been like, I had, like, it's ironically, for the past few days I've gone on my own rants, and like, because I've been in this, like, speaking about truth and all of that. But for me, it was always clear to combine the inner and outer work. You need to be aware what's going on, but engage the inner work, the psychological inner work, my own childhood wounding trauma in different ways, my own stuff, my shadow projections and all of that. But you're right, there's so much nonsense and manipulation and brainwashing in the mainstream media, but there's so much nonsense in the conspiracy movement as well, which I've especially, like, as more people have gotten quote unquote red pill of the past few years, and you just glue to the screen like the armchair conspiracy theorists, and they have no discernment. It's just like insanity, So thank you for speaking on that, because I feel that's actually ironically a program as well that is running, to keep people stuck in this whole paranoid black pill conspiracy movement, And I think you're a great example of like, no, these are things that happen. How can I heal from it? How can I use it for healing and see this in my own journey, not only psychologically and spiritually, which I want to get into as well. But I want to just quote you again, because that kind of summarizes what you just said from your book, where you write, survivors of extreme abuse cannot possibly be expected to ever go public, considering the extensive trauma and the obvious potential for re-traumatization, not only from retelling of horrific events, but from the massive uncensored victim blaming that is sure to follow, and I'm sure gaslighting and all of that, not to mention what you just got into a bit, the threats and intimidations tactics by the network. So speaking about the last part, because that's really fascinates me, because, from my understanding, I've studied psychopathy and trying to understand the mindset. There's trauma, but there's also like pure lack of conscience. And almost the Achilles heel, from my understanding, is that they will never be discovered. They just have this, we will never be caught. It's almost the weak point in this sense, But, how, with your story, because I remember you sharing some things, and I don't know if you mentioned in the book, that you even like were threatened, like you have to like even, kill another child, kill each other, like this whole hardcore mind control program to keep you in this ring.
No, that is very much in the book. Absolutely.
Oh, that's in the book. Yeah, because that's kind of like what was the exit as well, right? To get out of the ring.
Exactly. And that is the main, that is sort of the main thing about the book that I hope can be revealed, is like really will follow the mindset, because I had to, in order to kill, you have to get into that mindset. That's to say, you mentioned it in the beginning, you don't want to be in a victim state. And I'll go farther and say that you need to be in a victim state in order to do harm. So for me, at the point where I was exiting, having to get myself into the state that I had to get into in order to perform this killing, which, by the way, that it wasn't a choice so much as the choice was always to do what would be least harmful for the victim. And in the network, things are set up so that you will very soon understand that the least harmful for the victim is for you to do it. So you put in these impossible situations where the least harm is for you to do the harm, the most harm, the worst. So healing from killing is very difficult. And that's what's taken me so long. I'm almost 60. That's what's taken me so long in my healing. And of course, I continue to heal. But to heal from, that knowledge that you've taken a life, that's very challenging because you can't take it back.
Yeah.
Anything that happens to you, maybe you could revive, you could come back, you're alive, but if you've taken a life, you can't take it back. And to really get to the place where you understand fully that you didn't want it is, obviously as a child, you have no idea that you cannot separate those things. It's much too complex. You're in it, you're doing it. Same with the sex, you're in it, you're doing it, your body has responses to it. You're made to perform violence. There's hormonal and physical releases that happen.
Yeah.
You cannot separate that from wanting it. So that's really taken the longest. And I work a lot with other survivors and a lot on those, removing the shame of these things and getting to the truth, which was that we never wanted it. We never wanted any of it, really, but it was all just coming to us. So that last part, the book, the climax of the book really is about taking the reader through that experience so that you can get a real in-depth firsthand experience of what it is like to when everyone has a killer instinct. Yes. And in the network, that killer instinct is manipulated and used as a channel. So you're forced to do it, but it offers a channel for you to now release all your abuse, all the stuff that you're carrying around, all the pain that you haven't been able to feel and heal from. It gives you this channel to release it all in this one moment. And so there is something that happens when you go through it, when you do it, but everyone has that instinct. Everybody has fight, flight. Yes. Fight means to kill the opponent so that you can be free of the trauma, so that you can be free. So that instinct is then misused very strongly because those psychopaths are always in that state, if you will. They're always in the sort of like the reptilian mind. Their limbic brain doesn't work. Let's say their emotional brain doesn't work. They just have feelings that are narcissistic. Let's say they feel very sorry for themselves a lot, but they're very emotionally completely undeveloped. So going through that experience and describing it in the book, it's my hope that when you get this firsthand view of what it is like, that you can get more deeper understanding of your own impulses, let's say.
Yeah, that's very true. It reminds me a bit, I'm big into shadow work, Jungian psychology. Lorna, we work with our groups, and I have to face myself because what I see happening in the world, especially again, truther movement, not to talk now, project on the truther movement, but there's a lot of...
I want to talk more about that.
Okay, let's do it, because there is a lot of projection happening. For their own evil, you know what I mean? Because you have been deep into it, but just killing all these psychopaths running, projecting all your hate onto them is not going to change anything. Evil is not going to be eradicated by trying to kill it. And that's what they're trying to do, right? They just take them all out, arrest them, wear the mass arrest, let's kill them all, and then we can have a party together. That's not,
and then you're going to be the killers, and then you're going to be the psychopaths, and then and then you'll have a new power paradigm.
Yeah. exactly.
Which is the same power paradigm, just with new people in it.
Yeah. Even if what's happening, I don't want to get into like current topics, but Fauci, Gates, and all these, Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, yeah, be aware of it. But I see so much hate projected on these individuals. You become that what you're trying to fight against, right? I have even Laura, my wife, just posted this great quote from Nietzsche. If you're staring too much into the abyss will stare back to you. Be careful that you do not become what you fight against. And that's
Absolutely. If you are constantly focused on these very dark topics,
yeah.
As a survivor, I have come across way too many people who came to me as if they're the big hero who helps the poor survivors. And I never liked them. And there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, there's a lot of self-appointed heroes out there who are doing the good work,
self-righteous,
against the evil, against, let's get those bad guys. It is very childish. And those people are often total narcissists.
Yeah. Because they do it for themselves, right? They feel, I'm so great. I'm
this is about their own shadow. This is all about them. This has nothing to do with the survivors. I'm around these people. They don't see me at all. They're not interested in me, in my story, in what I've been through. They're only interested in that I see them as what they need me to see.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They are only interested in those are the people that have the big platforms. So again, if you see anybody with a huge platform, that is to say, the hierarchy works like this, right?
Yeah.
People at the top are the psychopaths who use their privilege and entitlement to pass it on to everybody below until we are in the Western society, the underprivileged who are carrying all the burden of pain for everybody.
Yeah.
Who have no privileges, who just have to suffer all the time. That's why poverty is necessary. We need the poor for everybody. Okay, so that's clear. And everybody has a spot there somewhere.
Yeah.
And everybody participates psychologically by being part of pyramids. There's pyramids everywhere like that.
Yeah.
So do you work for a corporation? Do you have somebody above you? Where are you in the corporation? Where are you in Western society? Okay, that's like a big question about privilege, etc. So we're all somewhere. Okay. We don't choose to be there necessarily, I mean, some people try to get into a different place, but okay, we just are what we are. Then we have all these smaller triangles. So down to the familial, we have small families, and there is one person who is in charge. Usually, in the old world triangle, there was the man in charge, and then there was a woman who's submissive, and then there was the children who have to eat it.
Yeah.
They have to take it until they're old enough that they have power, that they can give it to their kids, and those kids are going to have to eat it.
Yeah.
That's the power abuse in the family. Now, the power abuse in the family is very important for the psychopaths at the top to continue. Incest is very important for the psychopaths at the top not to be healed, not to be spoken about, not to be revealed, not to be become a national conversation about how prevalent it really is and how much work needs to be done to prevent it.
Yeah.
Very important, because that's how the smallest triangle of power abuse stays intact. Yes. And this is, by the way, used by, someone like Kathy O'Brien, for example, her incestuous father, who was actually mailing out child porn materials, was caught and then recruited by the CIA because he, instead of going to jail, he got to give his daughter up for MK Ultra.
Wow. Okay.
So that's how it works. So you need those families, you need that power abuse to exist on a small scale. But any kind of place that you go, there's this hierarchy. So you have triangle, you have those triangles in any kind of organization, in any kind of corporation. But you also have it, like, to go back to the truthers, when you see that there's a stark hierarchy, that's to say one person at the top Maybe it's a sort of like a new age guru, or maybe it's a sort of like a big truther who's on every panel for every discussion about how are they operating, who is supporting them, what are they leaving out.
Yes.
Because there's somebody out there that I could see right away, total megalomaniac, who very much needs, and I think this must be a mind control slave, because this person, the way they speak, it's like, whoa, that eloquence. Like, I've been trained that way. I know.
So that's what I'm saying, like, sorry to interrupt, but that's actually, now you're turning what your own MK Ultra program, which you deprogram yourself from, but you're aware of it, and now your psychic vision has been sharpened basically to see through them, right? To see through the mask.
Yes. So this person did something very big on an SRA level, and I didn't trust him at all. And I saw that this big SRA thing that they did, and I can't even name the name because that's a dangerous person, was a mockery. So victims are speaking to a black robed judges.
I know what you're talking about.
All right. So anyway, this megalomaniac, how does he work? Has like, he's atop of a paradigm. He's atop of a power paradigm where he's the big boss. He's got lots of people working for him, supporting him. Everybody has to say he's so wonderful, he's so great, but never mentions the British Crown. And any survivor that was there that mentioned the British Crown, they got into trouble with him, because that's what he appears to be protecting.
Yeah.
Not only that, he also has, a big house in the center of London. Like, you do this work, it's not something that's going to make you very rich,
I agree with that. I think I know who and what you're talking about. I've seen it as well. And it confirms my red flags, because a lot of, especially in this work, in this truthers, some people like, how, you're quite making way too much money for speaking out about these kind of things. So what's really going on here? But you're right. I mean, the way I see it, this is how the control works. But especially you lure people, and I call it the shit sandwich, excuse my French, but basically the shit sandwich is like, you have, some truth like in the buns, to lure people in, but then it's a disinformation switched and people just swallow it and they get vectored away while, kind of stuck in some rabbit dead all hand, but getting off the path, right? So that's kind of how it works.
How you can recognize it is it an old time paradigm? Like, is it like, it's not one person at the top who is like getting all the credit and who's got all these volunteers working for free for them?
Yeah.
That's how you can recognize it.
And I think the key point is also what I think what I see in the truth movement, there's the concept of controlled opposition, obviously, but on purpose. I think sometimes this word is being thrown away too loosely. I've been called controlled opposition, because
me too.
So it's like
me too.
There you go. You know what I mean? Like, you can't win. But I think the issue is, for the basic psychological trauma perspective, a lot of here's the thing, ironically, like the mainstream calls a lot of conspiracy theorists mentally ill, and it's not too much about mental illness, but there's trauma and there's some truth in it. A lot of conspiracy theorists, red pill people, are very mentally not well individuals. They're acting from their trauma, their shadow, that gets activated. Then they find something because they're not happy with their own lives, and then get on this cause. I'm like, oh, this is so important. Like, use that to disassociate or, spiritually or psychologically bypass from what they need to face within themselves. Because what I notice, and that's what I talk about a lot, there's not much, if at all, any self-work in this movement. It's just information-based externally, and then you have these networks, and kind of like, especially nowadays with the internet, it's like, it's insane. So it's so refreshing to hear that you see that as well and call it out and speak out about it and see through it, because that's a big issue.
Oh gosh. And then there's a leader usually that is doing all the dirty work for them, or there's like a secret leaders, secret heroes that are doing all this work behind the scenes that we never get to see, that is all being done. And then we can just sit back behind our computer screen and just trust that it's all happening, people. When we have no proof that anything's happening at all. It's all crazy. What I hear, those stories, the white hat stories, I'm sorry, I am not on board at all.
Everybody, the pedophiles being arrested, and that's a whole
right.
So in your experience, so when you became more popular, right? I'm curious, like, so you have been then, obviously then, like you mentioned, you notice like, oh, now people are trying to take advantage of my story and me, right? So you had to become very vigilant, discerning. Was it like,
Yeah.
did you expect that? Or was it also like a disillusionment? Oh my God, who can I trust? Who can I not trust? Kind of
Oh,
thing.
that's so good that you're going there. I love this conversation. Okay, yeah. So this is for me was a part of my personal growth to understand if I need to belong anywhere, I'm gonna get reeled in. But I've always been very sensitive to being used because I
Mm-hmm.
did do almost 30 years of healing before I went public.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Wow.
all right, then, try me. And of course, I have a naturally rebellious nature.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of I'll follow my own, instinct, and that's connected to spirit,
Yes.
feeling that spirit truth is sort of was my religion, truth. So if it's by falling and getting back up, having people interview me, and it's like, oh, and then like for example, I don't want to do interviews if they're going to be behind a paywall,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't want to do interviews if it's going to support one platform with a very strong ideology on one side or the other side,
Mm-hmm.
So I've been increasingly more careful who to speak to, and so that includes today. I say no a lot. I say no a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot
Mm-hmm.
to anybody who wants to interview me. So yeah, there's
Good.
that, and then my story was picked up anyway in 2020 by the QAnons. And then very interesting this was the time when we were preparing this lawsuit. So now this big name family knows that I might be filing a lawsuit. And let's just say SRA was not connected to QAnon at
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
But within that time, from the time that we filed this complaint with them, not in a docket because it was never filed, but from the time that we sent them the complaint, a draft of the complaint, which included the way I had met this person. As I said earlier, this wasn't a ritual where a child was killed.
Mm-hmm.
That child's blood was collected and drank.
Wow.
So they drank the blood. That was in there.
Yeah.
And then what started to happen? Some months later, there were yoga influencers that literally were telling people in the yoga world now, but also went on PBS and did interviews and so forth, and saying, people, don't be so naive as to believe that the elites kill children and drink their blood.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Don't believe that.
Yeah.
So several months later, this is the thing that gets picked up and ridiculed, and it gets connected to QAnon and becomes now a far right-wing conspiracy theory, fascist conspiracy theory. So by the time, if we would have filed that lawsuit, by the time it would have been filed in August of 2020, it would have been a crazy conspiracy story, but it wasn't when we filed it.
Wow. So that's how the media that ridicules it. But thanks for sharing this, because I wanted to ask you about this as well, because I've been part of I live in Arizona now, but lived in LA for 25 years. I'm also a big yogi. I've been in the yoga community because Laura and I also, we have hit articles have been written by us, by the conspirituality guys, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, of course. I know them.
So exactly, some very toxic people. I know these individuals from back then. They're interestingly also, they're self-proclaimed atheists but teach yoga. So that's a fascinating
and they
paradox.
mock anything having to do with God.
Yeah, exactly. And they're extremely just talking. Anyway. Excuse me again, just talking shit, just talking constantly from this higher, like holier than thou. We know everything, and this is the way it is, and everybody else is wrong.
Well, there you have it again. No interest in their own shadow.
Basically. Exactly. Like why am I exactly?
And a lot of privilege also, a lot of male privilege there. That is not being
three guys. Like, come on, white guy. For me, it's always truth mixed with lies. This whole Q phenomenon is this whole topic in itself, but it exposed a lot of people in the wellness / yoga community. You know what I mean? Who kind of like also took very, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and ridiculing something that needs, you brought up, like you started talking about this experience years before. I mean, like I mentioned, we were talking.
Yeah, right. I was now called QAnon conspiracy, whereas I've been out since 2013, and nobody had heard of Q.
Exactly. Wow. So I'm glad we touched upon this whole topic as well, the truth. Like, that's
People
awesome.
in the yoga world would send me their newsletters, which said, "Don't believe this crap."
Yeah.
People who know my story, but
Wow.
somehow didn't connect me with SRA, which was now being vilified and connected to QAnon. So there's this, this cognitive dissonance there. No, my story. I have protected you from the gory details. I have maybe not mentioned drinking the blood of the children before because I don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yes. Yes.
But then this comes back to me as like, don't believe this.
Wow. Wow. So we're at the end of the first hour. So there's still, I feel we just scrapped the surface. Because I really want to talk more, especially in the second hour. I also want to know the healing journey. And now you have an amazing project going on, which I've been aware of for many years, prison yoga, teaching yoga in prison. I want to hear your spiritual journey, because it's very important how yoga, Paramahansa Yogananda, had an effect on your spiritual journey, your psychological healing journey, trauma work, and all of that, the modalities that have really helped you. Because I think that can help a lot of people nowadays. Because the biggest part, again, for survivors like you is what you mentioned before. And we see this in our work and myself, this internalized shame. Shame is like what keeps everything going, how they used, that's why they made you kill this child. They know exactly how to use shame and guilt against you to protect themselves, because you will never speak about it, may even take your own life, because shame and guilt is what drives people to suicide usually, right? And you really have overcome this. It's amazing. So just for our listeners, again, I want to people really applaud. You can get this on Amazon, I would suppose, that book.
Well, you can't find it in a search on Amazon, weirdly, but if you go to Amazon, the best way is to go to my website, AnnekeLucas.com, and there are all the links. Because it's not easy to find in an Amazon search. You'll find at the moment, you'll only find the Kindle version, which is fine, but the paperback, you'd have to go to books and then do a search.
So I'm going to link to your website. I'm going to make also direct links to the Amazon book link itself. Quest for Love, Memoir of a Child Sex Slave by Anneke Lucas. Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll be right back for the second hour. From people who are not members yet, you can sign up at veilofreality.com. Gives you insight into a lot of deeper topics we cannot usually share in the public, especially nowadays. And with that being said, we take a little break and we'll be right back. Thanks so much, Aneka.